There is a talk seminar of Professor Carmelo Ferlito on the Austrian business cycle theory from Mises to Hayek. But we have also here Professor Jan Toporowski, so I will do a very quick presentation of both. Maybe Stefano Lucarelli, who is teaching at this university, will come later on. Carmelo Ferlito is Italian, as the name says, from Verona, where he graduated, but he worked in Malaysia, in Asia, for a multinational
in the poultry industry?
In the poultry industry. But he teaches history of economic thought in Malaysia, and he has many teaching in Verona in economic thought and so on. He has published many books. I have in front of me a couple of books on the recent crisis. He is an expert in Austrian economic theory. In English, one of his books is Hermeneutics of Capital, a post-Austrian theory for a Hellenic world. Professor Jan Toporowski is from the University of London, SOAS, and he teaches here since many years international monetary economics, which is an important course that you may take in the second year. He is one of the experts worldwide and theoretic experts on the topic, and he has published extensively on money and finance. He is actually working on the second volume of his biography about Kaleski. This is Professor Lucarelli, who
nice to see you.
Is teaching the international monetary economics with Toporowski, the other half, but also economia monetaria internazionale. He is now associate professor, and so we are happy to have him among us. He's publishing a lot what is called...
Too much.
I didn't want to say that. What is called food for thought, and so we are lucky to have three experts who listen in the talk, and they are also in the debate. He will speak about 1 hour. As I told you, I will ask to some of you compulsorily, and to others if they wish, to some summary of what is written. So,
Good afternoon, and thanks to Professor Bellofiore for having asked me to be here this afternoon, and Professor Toporowski and Professor Lucarelli in general to assist and to take part in this lecture. You are recording, so then you want to keep it closer? No, closer to me. Even closer. I don't want that later you cannot. No, you can, puoi registrare, se vuoi metterlo più vicino, questo che sto dicendo.
Okay. Okay. Well, it's the first time for me to have such a big quantity of recording devices, so I have to be very careful in what I'm going to say, not to say something that can be used against me.
We will use everything against you. I don't know if it is the effect
Yeah.
of Professor Ferlito or Professor
Okay. During the seminars,
but we have here also students of the last couple of years here in this master, so they will testify that this is a great course, and of course this course is worldwide, and even somebody coming from Florence, specifically for Professor Toporowski. Okay.
so I'm very pleased to have so many students today. And again, I have to be careful in what I'm going to say because there is such a big quantity of devices. One thing, how many of you did the exam of History of Economic Thought? Okay. So I suppose that you already heard what the Austrian School of Economics is. But the others, they already know what the Austrian School of Economics is. Shortly, you can come to the class of Professor Bellofiore on next Tuesday at 2:30 in the afternoon, which I will talk in Italian about the general aspects of the Austrian School of Economics, which is, as you can understand, my research topic specialization. In general, is one of the three streams of the subjective revolution, which started in 1871 with Karl Menger, and present several aspects worth of interest, in particular the theory of money, the theory of human action, the theory of market process, and one very controversial theory of the business cycles. I will talk extensively about this also in the class of Professor Lucarelli on Tuesday morning, always in Italian, because I did my own version of the Austrian theory. I tried to develop it further. So if some of you is interested in these topics, can come also for this class, or eventually buy my books or download from the net my academic papers, my scientific papers. Here there are my affiliation, but there is also my email address. So if some of you want to write and have reading materials about this topic, feel free to do so. The Professor Bellofiore will give these slides to the students, can be distributed. Okay, so later on you can find my email address and my personal account on Academia, where you can find most of my papers if you're interested eventually in reading them, or if you find difficult to sleep and you need an incentive. There are few bibliographical references for the topic of today. These are, as you can see, I wrote extensively on this topic, and I put, of course, only the most important works on this topic, because it's a huge topic which started to be developed in 1912 with the first book, the first Austrian book on the topic, and is still a subject under development inside the school and also outside the school. Here we have more. As you can see, it's only a few works. The first work on this page exists also in Italian, and your Professor Bellofiore is the author of an extensive introduction for the Italian edition, published I think in 1996 or 8?
1998.
1998, by the Edizioni Scientifiche Italiane.
It was in a collection of writings on monetary theory edited by Augusto Graziani yesterday. And as I told him, he has the introduction to 120 pages. But I had to read the book twice, because the first time I fell asleep. But the second, I walked.
It's quite a difficult book, but here, for the people among you which are too lazy to read, there are also some online resources. These are online lectures on the Austrian business cycle theory, done by American, German, and Spanish professors. Okay, now we can start. mostly everything in the Austrian School of Economics, or at least in the modern Austrian School of Economics, started with an economist called Ludwig von Mises. Okay? So even if inside the Austrian school then different paths were followed on the research topics, we can state that most of the topics were initiated by Ludwig von Mises, an Austrian economist which ended his career in the United States at the New York University because he first went to Switzerland, fled in Austria. When Hitler took power, he had some Jewish blood, so he had to flee Austria. Moved to Switzerland first, and later on to the United States. And it is in the United States that he gave birth to several disciples, which are nowadays among the most important economists in the Austrian school. One of them is Israel Kirzner, which is still alive, was a student of Mises and even of Hayek. He's very old, I think 86, 87 years old, but he's still alive. And at New York University, another one of them is Mario Rizzo, among the younger people of the Austrian school. And Mises gave rise, or developed at least, one flow of the business cycle theory, of a group of business cycle theory, which is called the monetary approach to the Austrian business cycle, which means to put accent on the effect of monetary elements, and in particular of monetary manipulations, on the business fluctuations. As we will see later on, this work was continued by one of his disciples, Friedrich August von Hayek, which won the Nobel Prize in 1974 for his research on business cycle, but which later on took a slightly different stream of research. One of the attempts of this lesson, of this lecture, will be to demonstrate that even if in generally we talk about an Austrian theory of business cycle, and Mises and Hayek are put together as the main authors of the Austrian business cycle theory, there are few very important differences in the approach of Mises and in the approach of Hayek, which deserve a closer attention, but this attention unluckily was not put as it deserves even by the economists which belong to the Austrian School of Economics. And later on we will see how Hayek, even being influenced strongly by Mises, can be ascribed mostly to a stream of research which flourished under Arthur Spitov, a German economist. But we will go on this later on. The starting point of the analysis of Mises is the concept which was introduced by a Swedish economist, Knut Wicksell, of the difference between the so-called monetary interest rate and the existence of a different category of interest rate, which he called the natural interest rate. Which is I stress a lot on this initial part because this is like the main pillar of all the building that we are going to build together this afternoon. The monetary interest rate is a concept very familiar to you. Whenever you hear on television or read a newspaper that the central bank raised the interest rate or lowered the interest rate, then we are talking about the monetary interest rate, which means the official interest rate fixed by monetary authorities. So we are talking in a way of a sort of price, Okay, usually we label the interest rate as the cost of money, which is not arising from the market, okay, but it is fixed by the monetary authority. You as consumers have no power on the interest rate, right? You cannot influence the central bank, but the central bank makes its own evaluations on the general economic conditions, and you know that they rise the interest rate when there is inflation, and they lower it when we are going through a process of a crisis, right? In fact, now we are living in a period of so-called zero interest rate, but still the economy is not flying. The Austrian introduced a different category of interest rate, which is called natural interest rate, and according to them is the interest rate which would emerge in the market if there was no central bank. So if supply and demand would be free to meet in a market and let the price of money to arise from the bargaining between demand and supply. But for the Austrians, even to define the interest rate as the cost of money is wrong. For the Austrians, the interest rate is the measure of the intertemporal structure of preferences, which is, I think, a neglected concept in modern mainstream economic theory. I believe that you never heard about something like the intertemporal structure of preferences, right? What does it mean? For the Austrians, the interest rate is the market price of present goods in terms of future goods. But even more accurately, we can say that the interest rate measures if at a certain moment a certain society is present-oriented or future-oriented. To make it simple, a future-oriented society is a society in which consumers are basically oriented to save, so are creating available resources through their saving for the entrepreneurs to be used for long-term investment projects. Okay? A present-oriented society, on the contrary, is a society in which people tend more to spend what they have, and therefore entrepreneurs are more keen to embark themselves into consumer goods investment projects. Okay? The interest rate is that synthesis value which tells us if a society is present-oriented or future-oriented. And this is what we mean saying that interest rate is the measure of the intertemporal structure of preferences. In the market, according to Mises, there is the possibility for an equilibrium rate, the natural rate, to arise as that value that assures a correspondence between the intentions of the consumers and the intention of the entrepreneurs. That means that if consumers are future-oriented, the entrepreneurs also can become future-oriented. I give you a very simple example. Suppose that the interest rate fixed by the central bank does not exist. So interest rate is treated as a market price as all the other prices. If at a certain point, because of whatever reason, consumers become future-oriented, so they start to save more, and they accumulate more saving in their bank accounts, what happened to the interest rate? We raise. Why? Because the supply of funds is increasing. Okay? Sorry. Again, the interest rate is going down. Okay, because the supply of funds is increasing, and the fact that this price is going down is telling to the investors, to entrepreneurs, that it might be more convenient to invest in long-term projects, right? Because consumers are getting future-oriented. So it's not simply the fact that there are more loanable funds available, more savings available for investment, and the interest rate as a price is lower than that the investors start to invest in long-term investment projects. But the low interest rate is not simply telling that investing is cheaper. It's telling that consumers are future-oriented. And therefore, it is better to invest in long-term investment projects because there is no demand for consumption goods. Consumers prefer to save. You understand? So it's not simply the cost of borrowing that works as a signal for investors to invest more. But this signal is telling something more. Not simply investing is cheaper, but consumers are not going to consume, are more keen to invest. That's why it is better to invest in long-term investment projects. You got this point? This point is very important because this is one of the key differences between the Austrian approach and the general neoclassical approach, considering the interest rate as a signal telling to the parts involved in the market what's going on. We are more present or future oriented. Okay? According to Mises, something bad happened when we introduce a monetary interest rate as a policy instrument in the hands of the central bank, and therefore the central bank is free to manipulate a signal. You understand that if the interest rate goes down because of the manipulation of the central bank, the investors are basing their investment decisions on a false signal. Because the central bank doesn't decide on the base of intertemporal preferences, doesn't lower the interest rate because consumers are future oriented, but because they believe, in example, that this is a simple way to attract investors in long-term investment projects. You think about all the debate that followed the crisis which exploded 10 years ago in 2007. All the debate was, we have to lower the interest rate. We have to lower the interest rate because this will favor the insurgence of new investments. But this indeed didn't happen. Right? And we are still in a crisis after 10 years. We should start to think that maybe something is wrong in this policy instrument. For the Austrian economists, the artificial lowering of the interest rate by the central bank not only is not a way to cure a crisis, but it is even the source of a crisis. So the crisis, a boom and bust cycle, begins right because there was, according to Mises, an artificial lowering of the interest rate, or in general an expansion of fiduciary instruments, a monetary expansion, what nowadays is called a monetary expansion, which can take the form of a lowering of the interest rate or of printing more money. In general, the condition is that the new funds available for the investment are not funds actually available via saving. Okay, you understand that if we have more saving and the funds that banks lend to investors are based on existing saving, we have a balanced structure. But if the funds that are lent to investors exceed the amount of saving available in the banks, it means that we have virtual money flowing in the market. So money that did not exist before, which is created from nothing by the banks. Right as Schumpeter was used to say, the bankers become the effort of the economic system. You follow me? So, the additional, or we have the additional credit created artificially by the banks, or we have directly a lowering of the interest rate. But the creation of additional credit is just a way to lower the interest rate, of course, increasing the supply of money. And the lowering of interest rate, even the Austrian agrees that produce stimulate new investment and stimulate the economic activities. Even projects which would not have been thought profitable if the rate of interest had not been influenced by the manipulation of the banks are now found profitable, and therefore the result of credit manipulation of lowering the interest rate is to create economic activities that in different conditions would not have been found as profitable. So we are inducing artificial economic activity, which is, according to Mises, not a sound economic activity. This unsound economic activity increases the demand for production materials and labor. Of course, if I start a new economic activity, I need new machines, okay, and I need labor. This brings, of course, the price of machines and labors to increase because the demands for these goods increase. And as a consequence, we have an increase in consumption goods. Why? This is a direct consequence of the fact that we have or an increase of wages, if we have to increase the wages in order to steal labor from one industry to the other, or even if we take labor from the list of the unemployed, because we suppose that there is unemployment, we have people that are now earning money that before were not earning money because they were unemployed. And therefore we have a new pressure on the demand for consumption goods. Are you following me? These Athos, Porthos and Aramis look a little bit confused. Are you okay? Okay. New people entering the labor market or switching industry are putting a pressure on the consumption goods. If the central bank at this point, because of the inflation pressure, would stop the artificial creation of money or the artificial lowering of the interest rate, the boom would rapidly stop, because the signal which attracted investor to invest new money is telling something different. All of a sudden, the key signal is modified. But this usually doesn't happen. And for quite a relatively long time, banks continue to expand credit on a larger and larger scale. This means that prices and wages continue to rise. And the creation of new enterprises takes something away from other enterprises. Of course, the people that need to buy resources to be used in these new investment projects need to steal resources away from other industry. And if an attempt were made to prevent the sudden halt of the upward movement, the boom, and the collapse of prices which would result by creating more and more credit, a continuous and even more rapid increase of prices would result. The more we attract new resources, new labor toward the new investment projects, thanks to the new artificial credit, the more the prices for that resources will increase. The prices for the investment goods, the price of labor, which means wages, and correspondingly we have a further pressure on the consumption good prices, because the more and the more the laborers, the workers are earning more money because they are attracted toward the new industries. And therefore we are in front of a general inflationary process. Inflation and the boom can continue smoothly only as long as the public thinks that the upward movement of prices will stop in the near future. So, of course, this process can continue if the expectations of inflation are considered as temporary. If you know that inflation will not stop, you will start to save more, because or you will start a different behavior, because you know that the money that you are earning are going to lose their value because of the inflation.
Excuse me, are you supposing that you're producing at full capacity means that, for example, the consumer goods as the demand increases, also the supply can increase, but the supply cannot increase because they are already producing at their full capacity?
Yeah, indeed. This demand, as we will see later when we will talk about Hayek, this is an aspect that Hayek later on introduced in his analysis with the phenomenon of the so-called forced saving. Because this new investment in long-term projects are driving away resources from the consumption goods production, consumers which are pushing on the demand for consumption goods because they have now an increased purchasing capacity, they don't find available the goods that they need. And therefore, this is what Hayek called the forced saving. So they want to buy something which is not available in the market because investors are focused on different kind of investments. Just to show that what we are talking about is not something coming down from the clouds, think about the housing bubble that started around 2003-2004 also in Europe and drove the system toward the collapse in 2007. Maybe you were too young, but I remember very well this process of credit creation. I'm quite a conservative person, as mostly all the Austrian people, all the Austrian economists, and I tend not to buy things if I don't have money. I remember my first car cost me 3,000 euros because that was the amount of money that I had available for cash and I could buy without a bank loan. I don't trust so much banks, okay? But I was, in that period we were around 2003, 2004, 2005, I was receiving a lot of calls from banks asking me, do you want a loan For what? I don't know. You can take 5,000 euros, 10,000 euros, you can go for holiday, you can go for plastic surgery, you can buy a car, or whatever you want. So, but I don't need that. But how can you refuse that? The credit conditions are so good, so comfortable, so convenient. So listen, if I have money to buy something, I do. If I cannot, I don't do it. I even don't go for holiday. I didn't go for holiday in my life for 30 years. So why should I start now? But the pressure on consumption credit was very strong. And this is the artificial creation of money in the power of the banking system through certain policies. And there was the general condition that yes, indeed, we can, and I knew many people that went for holidays with credit money. Which is against the basic common sense of the old style family. We have money, we do. We don't have money, we don't do. But it's something that is happening now, in example, with the new young people in China, which became totally consumption addicted against the Chinese tradition, which is highly saving oriented. I traveled to China a lot in the past, and I can assure that this is happening. But as soon as the public opinion becomes aware that there is no reason to expect an end of inflation because prices are going on and on, like it happened with the housing bubbles, the house that my parents purchased for 90,000 euros after 5 years was evaluated like 300,000 euros. And now we would not be able to sell it for more than 60,000 euros after the crisis. But there was really an inflation, in particular in that industry, that was observable by attentive people. So as soon as people become aware that inflation is not going to stop and prices will continue to rise, the panic set in. And the people start to try to get rid of money, buying goods in order to preserve the value of things. They try to. You think about the running toward buying gold after a crisis. This is a typical refuge investment, no? Or now there is the boom of the Bitcoin. Some of you, the technological people, maybe know something about Bitcoin. And the product price increase disproportionately. So if the banks decided to help the expansion of credit, it will quickly be seen that the false impression of profitability created by the credit expansion has led to unjustified investments. That's the case of many people that bought houses and found out that the price was too expensive. Or was the case of people that initiated to build condominium or houses and suddenly they had to stop to build that, and we had skeleton of buildings in our provinces and unfinished investment projects. If you have this in mind, or people that couldn't afford to pay the loan. And when I've seen in the television people desperate because of this, and maybe working class people that were saying, hey, I cannot finish to pay my loan, I have four kids to feed, and now I cannot pay anymore for my villa. The idea is maybe you did a wrong investment at the beginning, when as a working class member you decided to buy a double-story villa that was not in your purchasing possibility since the beginning. In general, the consequence is that many enterprises or business which had been launched thanks to the artificial lowering of the interest rate and which had been sustained thanks to the equally artificial increases of prices, no longer appear profitable. Some enterprises have to cut back their scale of operations, and others close down or fail. This is the crisis. This is exactly what happened in 2007. The prices collapsed, and the crisis and depression followed the boom. The capital invested in these enterprises is lost, to the extent that is locked in that in that project. If you build half of a house and you suddenly have no more money to finish it, that capital is destroyed. What you can do with the bricks that are left, or with the cement, or the concrete which is left. You might tell me now that it's not true that prices collapsed. In a way, prices collapsed in the housing, but in general we didn't observe a big deflation. But we didn't see a big deflation because the central bank, after the crisis exploded, continuously lowered the interest rate. So went ahead in created inflation. Instead, we have the impression that inflation is stable because we have a deflation going on, and the inflation put forward by the central bank is in a way creating the impression that nothing is happening on the price. We have a natural deflation pressure and an artificial inflation pressure which are conflicting to each other and creating the feeling that there is no inflation at all, or no deflation at all.
Excuse me, what causes the collapse of the prices if prices are increasing?
Yes.
So what causes the prices to collapse?
The prices collapse first because the economic activity that were initiated during the boom have to stop. Okay?
Why do they stop? Because prices are increasing, nothing that to be profitable.
They stop because the inflation is too high and there is no more capital available, because at a certain point the banks has to stop the credit expansion because the pressure for inflation is too high, and therefore the increase of the interest rate create the signal for the entrepreneurs to stop that investment. Because it's true that the price for consumption goods are increasing, but as we will see in a while when we will talk about Hayek, the investor invested in long-term investment projects. And therefore, the panic created by inflation is creating a general disinvestment process. On the consumer side, people try to sell products, and therefore they have to decrease the price of that goods. On the investment side, investment are simply stopped. And in the beginning of the crisis, of course, brings toward new unemployment. And the new unemployment means less people earning money and less people buying consumption goods. Okay? So what we are facing is a general restriction of credit. And the only way, according to Mises, to overcome this period is to create the conditions for new available funds, resources, new funds, new money to be accumulated. First of all, the production structures need to retake a shape which is consistent with the new economic situation. Secondly, in order to allow the system to start again, we need to accumulate new economic funds. But the fact that we need new accumulated funds in the bank means that we don't have to lower artificially the interest rate. Quite the contrary, we have to increase it. So, according to this perspective, the traditional cure for crisis, which is presented by central bankers or by economists all around the world, is definitely wrong. And as we will see, talking about Hayek, we are not facing a lower demand for consumption goods. Quite the contrary, the crisis starts because there is an excess of demand for consumption goods. But we will come to this in a while. At least you have to admit that the policy of lowering the artificial interest rate after the crisis is not bringing out the desired outcome. We are still living in a crisis. To find a job for you when you will be graduated or to find a good job will not be that easy. That's the reason why I found a job 10,000 kilometers away from here.
Diego di Bergamo says that in Bergamo it is all different, and that if you go to the University of Bergamo, you find jobs very easily, much higher than the national average.
So I will try to get a second degree here and see what happens.
You know, this was a special area. Let us say 15 years ago, I had many colleagues, especially one colleague, who complained for the low rate of innovation, product innovation, organizational innovation, etc. At the same time, it was true that at 14 years, people could find jobs. So there was the tendency that those who went to high school and university simply were the outcasts, not the privileged ones. But now we have a boom of the university enrollment in Bergamo, and I don't know if you believe the echo of Bergamo that everything is going okay, or that people go to the university because they think in this more competitive market it is better if I have a degree.
Or they go to university because there are no jobs available, so at least they spend some years doing something. This is also an option. Yeah. It is what happened in... I read recently, I don't remember where, but there was a study showing that during the negative stage of a business cycle, there is an increase in university enrollments, because to find a job is so difficult that people, meanwhile, they do something and take a degree. So, again, data needs an hermeneutical process that can bring to different conclusions, and one of the points of the Austrians is beyond the macro data, look for the micro foundations, the micro explanations. You cannot understand what's going on if you don't study the micro foundations, but micro foundations not in the neoclassical sense, not as simply statistical micro revelations, but as studying the reality as it is. So the economy will not be able to develop harmoniously and smoothly again unless the artificial measures that interfere with the level of prices, wages and interest rates, as determined by the free play of economic forces, are renounced once and for all. Therefore, the Mises' conclusion is, if we want to go out of the crisis, we have to give up to all the artificial things that we did in the past. So get the market work once again. Possibly take out credit policy from the central banks and stop the possibility for banks to create credit from nothing. Okay? But he also doesn't give room for illusions. To go out of a crisis is always a painful process. And this is something that actually brings, quite curiously, the Austrians close to one of the aspects of the Marxian analysis. The crisis is always a period which helps to clear out a mess that was created in a wrong way. So there is a boom brings bad consequences which needs to be cleared out, and the crisis is that necessary period for cleaning the mess. Okay? Now we move to the second economist, which is the subject of the topic of today, which is Friedrich von Hayek, which I believe Mises is, there is even a Ludwig von Mises Institute in Alabama, which is the official gospel of the Austrian School of Economics, and is working more or less like a church. in the sense that for them Mises is the Father, the Son and the Holy Spirit all in once. So they are not really open to a critical development inside the school. And the people that tried to do this are set aside from the school. I think about Don Lavoie and the hermeneutical approach inside the Austrian school. Rothbard, which is one of is like the what St. Peter was for Jesus, Rothbard was for Mises, the founder of the anarcho-capitalism. Rothbard wrote something very bad against the critics of the Mises gospel. But of course, when you have to set up a school, you need to be dogmatic in a way. I believe that Mises, even if he's writing long books, he's writing a lot, but he's quite consistent all along his life. You can read all Mises and you don't find big differences along the decades. Hayek, on the contrary, is a much more complicated author, which requires much more attention to be understood, and which changed his mind over the years. He introduced some element of novelty, in particular after Mises passed away, because as far as Mises was alive, always, you are my master, I owe everything to you. But then in a footnote you place something, but probably Professor Mises was wrong on this. My vision partially differs from the one of Professor Mises, always in a footnote. And because I like to read footnote, I could find out something that usually is not considered by the Austrian economists. But I believe that introduce an element of interesting reflection inside the Austrian school. And with Hayek we move from an accent on monetary manipulation to the role of expectations and how expectations and monetary manipulation eventually play a role in the discoordination of the intertemporal structure of preferences and the intertemporal structure of production. I didn't mention here the triangle of Hayek, but if some of you want to understand more this aspect, can write an email to me.
Maybe just add another note of color to what you said before. Because what you said about the reaction until a person is alive, you are very respectful, etc., is not very strange, at least in Italy, I don't know in other countries, in academia, in university. You expect that your master dies or cannot harm you anymore. The funny thing is that this Mises, I don't know if I told you that I found him very boring in writings, at least, but probably also as a person. However, this Mises was almost completely out of university. He was not a university professor. And Hayek referred to him, he didn't study with him. I think he studied with Wieser probably, or something like that.
Well, he went to the private seminar of Mises.
Yeah, but he was in contact with Mises.
Yeah.
University relations was another one. So it was a kind of ideological and economical relationship. Mises helped him go to the United States, so he went to the United States, became much more modernized than Mises. The Austrians made a pact of the devil, and the more conservative they are, the more they live. So when he said he emigrated in the United States, he was already 50 or 60. He was quite old, and he died almost a centenary man. And Hayek was something like the same. So it is impressive, this respect of the matter. But probably they felt also as a school which should be coherent and unitary against the devil of socialism and Keynesian.
Well, yeah, indeed, before the Keynesian time, they even didn't consider themselves a school. The Austrians, they didn't think that there was an Austrian school. They were thinking they were part of the general neoclassical or subjectivist revolution. It was only after World War II that they took consciousness of the existence of something like an Austrian economics. And if I may add, basically Hayek was in his young age a Fabian socialist, and he said that he changed his mind after reading Socialism, a book written by Mises in 1922. And he said this book made me change my mind, and was a little after that Mises created the Institute for the Business Cycle Study in the Chamber of Commerce of Vienna, and Hayek was appointed as the director of this institute. And this was the kind of relationship between Hayek and Mises. Then Hayek had a more difficult academic career, went to London as a visiting, called by Robbins, and after that, even when he went to the United States, he couldn't find the contact people that invited him to go to the United States. And for a period, he worked as a wash dishers in a restaurant to earn money. Wash dishers, you understand? Lava piatti, and later on, he won the Nobel Prize for Economics. So, and even if he was in Chicago, we discussed this morning with Stefano Lucarelli, he was not appointed as an economic professor because the Chicago school didn't recognize in him an economist, and he became a professor of social science, moral and social sciences, something like that. But again, he won the Nobel Prize for Economics, and nowadays there is nobody that will tell you that Hayek was not an economist. At least this is a good result for the Austrians. So I find interesting few aspects of the theory of Hayek is not that different with the theory of Mises, but there are few critical points that I want to stress. For Mises, the discoordination between the monetary rate and the natural rate happens because of the action of the central bank. Hayek introduced a very important element of novelty. He said, wait a moment, it might be that the natural rate of interest moved above the monetary rate without having the central bank moving it down. Why is that? Simply because of what are called profit expectations. What in the newspaper you read as the business sentiment, the business mood. When there is a positive business sentiment, people try to ask more money to the banks for doing something. And these increasing demands for loanable funds bring the natural interest rate up, so the market price up, even without monetary manipulation. Okay? Is this clear? This is very important. Because in this way, we don't need to put our attention simply to check if the government or the central bank does something wrong, but we introduce an element of an endogenous element inside our business cycle analysis. So for Mises, the business cycle starts, the boom and bust cycle starts always because of something exogenous from the outside. With Hayek, we have the possibility for the boom and bust cycle to be initiated by an endogenous thing, profit expectations. And Hayek mentioned explicitly in example the imitation process à la Schumpeter, because there is a certain point a good innovation. Think about the new economy in the beginning of 2000. Then many people follow investing in .com, in internet company, And this general imitation process, driving upward the demand for loanable funds, drives upward the interest rate, the natural interest rate. So we can have a discoordination between these two levels without monetary manipulation. So this coordination is created endogenously without central bank action. So the key elements become the temporal preferences, how people perceive the future. So if investors at a certain moment are future oriented for whatever reason, the important thing is that this coordination that we have between the temporal preferences of the investors and the eventual temporal preferences of the consumers. So how the system goes into a cortocircuit. If we had only the natural interest rate without monetary interest rate, the fact that the interest rate moved upward because of the pressure on the demand for loanable funds would attract the consumer to save more, so to change their temporal preferences, to change their consuming and saving behavior in order to meet the expectations of investors, and we can expect that expectations and preferences of investors and consumers would meet somewhere in the middle. But if this doesn't happen because the monetary interest rate remain low, because the central bank doesn't allow a real lineament of the two values, then we have the discoordinations between the intention of consumers and the intentions of investors. And here we have the problem. So in a way we can say that while the Mises approach is 100% a monetary approach, the Hayek approach is a semi-monetary approach, more stressing on the consequences of this discoordination between consumers and investors' intentions on the production structures. So, as we mentioned before, the first phenomenon arising from this discoordination of intentions, discoordination of intertemporal preferences, is the so-called forced saving. While investors have a future-oriented attitude at a certain moment, the possibility for consumer not to meet the intention of investors leave them present-oriented, and therefore they don't change their consumption habit. What does it mean? That at a certain point investors are moving toward producing investment goods, long-term investment projects, while consumers didn't change their propensity to consume, and therefore they press for getting something that is no more available in the market. And we have the so-called phenomenon of forced saving, which means frustrated expectations. The expectations of consumers are frustrated. But then again, because of this boom process, we have the same things happening like we observe with the Mises analysis. A rise of production factors prices, including wages, and a new pressure on consumption good prices. Again, only the credit expansion can support investment activity, which is going against the pushing demand for consumption goods. So, if we had no new credit from the banks, investor would not produce against the consumer attitude. Consumer wants consumption good. Why should I not produce what they want? but I have the incentive created by the money creation of banks that allow me to go into investment projects that at the moment are against the demand on consumption goods. But at a certain point, again, the pressure on consumption goods is so high and the subsequent inflation so high that the interest rate has everything but to rise to stop inflation. When the credit expansion halts, it becomes evident that demand for consumption goods exceeds the real funds available for investments in terms of absolute value. And therefore, the demand for capital goods is frustrated when the prices are also rising. The growth in the demand for consumption goods brings down the demand for capital goods. So we have a moment in which investors are putting money in capital goods, because of money creation, which is supporting their positive mood, while consumers are pushing for consumption goods. In the same moment in which the expansion needs to be stopped because the inflation is going too up, is the moment in which also the price for capital goods is going up, but it is stronger the demand for consumption goods. And the investor start to move away from investment in capital goods in order to go and invest, if possible, in consumption goods. But where is the problem? The problem is a new scarcity of capital, because the banks cannot go ahead with the creation of new funds, and funds are not available from saving because consumers didn't change their preferences. And therefore, the central phenomenon that brings out the crisis is a scarcity of capital, exactly as Spitov was saying. This is a word that Hayek, an expression that Hayek borrowed from Spitov. The scarcity of capital brought in by an excess demand for consumption good. And the crisis begins. This issue of the scarcity of capital brings Hayek later on to say something against Mises, which is, I believe, that to understand the cause of crisis, we have to understand the cause of scarcity of capital, and this is even more important than analyzing the fluctuation in the interest rate. And later on, in 1939, in a neglected book, Profit, Interest and Investment, he says even, I believe that to understand the causes of business fluctuation, the key element to be studied is not the interest rate, but the profit rate. And of course it's key. You understand, it's something that I also wrote on a Malaysian newspaper. Why, even if nowadays the interest rate is so low, investments are not flying, are not beginning again? Because what is key, as Hayek mentioned, is not interest rate, but profit expectations. Profit expectation in this moment, for several reasons, bad mood, bad institutional context, environment, high taxation, are frustrated. And therefore nobody would start a long-term investment project in this historical moment in the Western world. And therefore we are in a very delicate moment. So now my presentation is finished, and we can have questions. Stefano?
Just one very brief question.
I let everybody have his time. Now we open the questions. I like to ask the students to do questions after Professor Lucarelli. Then I think that Professor Toporowski has to go away. So if you want to say something after Lucarelli, and then the students, then me.
very brief question. Is correct to say that in a sense investment projects
In absence.
in a sense
Okay.
investment projects may crowd out consumers' expectations? That is my first question. The second question is, by following the Hayek approach, do you think that we encounter indirectly a sort of critique of the law of CE? Because in a sense, I think that we may also stress the fact that supply cannot create its proper demand.
Okay. For the first one, yes. Investment that are created, even if are created against the intertemporal structure of preferences. The key is this one, that investors start to invest because of positive mood, without involving the interest rate. But there is the interest rate, the monetary interest rate. And the monetary interest rate is left below the natural level, which was pushed upward, and this doesn't bring consumers toward the encounter with investor expectation. So while we have a change in the orientation of investors, we don't have the same change in consumers. And in this sense, because the investment projects of investor starts in this way, we can say that investment are crowding out consumption. And it is what Hayek called forced saving. So people want to buy something that is not available in the market. Regarding the second, which is a very delicate question, we have to understand. I would answer in a diplomatic way, yes and no. Yes, we have something that seems to go against the Say's law, but is doing so, is going in that direction because we don't have a free market. Because the interest rate is not free to show in itself in the market to consumer and investor, and it is hidden by the monetary rate. So this is not the market which is not working, but on the contrary, is the market that cannot work because it's not let free to work. So CE is not working because someone is shutting down his mouth, in a way.
Okay, Professor Tokowski.
Yes, shall I go to the front?
As you wish. It's better for us.
It's better for record.
Yes. Just, I actually cover a whole page full of notes, which I won't repeat here. I just want to concentrate on a number of points which I think are critical in the way in which Austrian business cycle theory has developed. First of all, Austrian business cycle theory emerged and has continued to develop. It emerged before the revolution in econometrics, national income accounting and so on of the 1930s. And in a sense, the attractive feature of the Austrian business cycle theory is you don't need to understand statistics or complex models of the economy to be able to appreciate what is happening. Now, this is an advantage, but this is an advantage for comprehension, but in other respects, it's a disadvantage because it makes it so much less systematic. And there is a tendency in Austrian theory to make up the story in retrospect to fit the theory. Let me just mention on three things. First of all, saving and investment. The notion that the the money markets and the financial system are bringing together savers and investors it's a pre-Keynesian idea. It was a 19th century idea. We now understand much more about banking and finance, and the fact that what happens in banking and finance is certainly more than just taking people's savings and finding borrowers for them. There are much more complex issues involved, in particular, for example, the rate of interest that you mentioned. The rate of interest that's relevant for investment is the long-term rate of interest, not the short-term one that's set by the central banks. And the fact is that the long-term rate of interest doesn't fluctuate very much. And because of this, it's very difficult to build a business cycle theory on the basis of this long-term rate of interest. The short-term rate of interest is really relevant only in the financial markets. This is one example of what we know. Let me go on to a key critical issue, which is the argument of overinvestment. In the Austrian business cycle is based on the idea that during the boom there's too much investment. Now we have data, we realize, for example, that in the 1920s, in the period preceding the 1929 crash, there was no overinvestment. In the period before the 2008 crisis, there was no overinvestment. It's true that there was investment in new industries, but it's matched by declining investment in old industries or disinvestment in use. We know this now because we have the data, and this casts serious doubt, I think, on the Austrian business cycle. But the Austrian theorists, because they're not statistically orientated, this becomes merely, it's irrelevant. Mises says that it was like this. Hayek said that it was like this. Therefore, it has to be like this. And this then leads on to the question of what did happen in the 1930s and the issue of what you do with policy. The policy of the Austrians was that you should do absolutely nothing at all. As the professor said, the government should renounce once and for all intervention. Okay? And this was this was the policy which was being recommended, including by Schumpeter in the 1930s. And it's epitomized by this beautiful phrase, beautiful answer that Andrew Mellon was the Calvin Coolidge's Treasury Secretary in the US before Roosevelt. Coolidge was the president before Roosevelt. And Andrew Mellon was asked what was the policy of the government in relation to the Great Depression. And he answered very, very clearly, our answer is simple: liquidate business, liquidate the banks, liquidate farms, liquidate the unions, start all over again. The world will be a better place. The virtues of hard work and thrift will replace the excesses of loose living. Thereafter, the proponents of this theory came to be known as the liquidationists, because they were prepared to sit on their hands while the whole economy collapsed.
They even raised the taxes.
Yes, they even raised taxes.
No.
But the point is that they were especially critical of Roosevelt's policy of trying to maintain prices so that prices didn't fall, to try and prevent deflation. So we have this, I think that the Austrian theory is always it's always attractive because there is an explanation. There is an attempt at systematic explanation, but there isn't systematic investigation. And once you come onto policy, you find a policy of just simply ignoring economic problems. But so that's my comment.
May I just counter answer to few things?
Yes.
This is also a common mistake done inside the Austrian school to label the Austrian school business cycle as a theory of the overinvestment. The Austrian theory of business cycle is not the theory of the overinvestment, but of the malinvestment. So the issue is not the magnitude of the investment, but the direction of the investment. So we can have whatever amount of investment that we want, as far as they are consistent with the intention of the consumers, as long as there is the possibility for the intention of consumers and investors to meet.
But what about if you define overinvestment, investments over voluntary saving?
Not simply, not simply, because it's not simply over voluntary saving, because there is investment that comes also from the resources of the companies. So not all the investments are done with money borrowed by banks. There are investments that are done with the normal cash flow of the companies. And on this, Schumpeter was very wrong when he said that there is no innovation that can arise with the normal cash flow created by the normal activity of a company. We need the bankers to create money ex nihilo for financing innovations. I live the business world, and I can tell you that most of our investments are done with our own cash flow. So,
but if you put the saving within the firms, so to speak,
yes,
you know, cash flow within the firms.
Okay, so the cash flow is considered saving.
Yeah.
Okay.
What was your term? Your preferred term?
No.
You said that not only voluntary saving, but also
the cash flow of the.
Okay. If you add that on,
yes,
I have no clear idea of how to define the situation of overinvestment, because as long as there are investments from some firms, there is an increasing cash flow for other firms.
That's why I agree with you. The issue is not overinvestment, but malinvestment. So the issue is not to have a certain amount of investment instead of another, but how this investment is directed and how this affected the intertemporal structure of production, the triangle of Hayek. So the issue is not in the amount, but in the direction. Then on the analytical possibility of presenting the Austrian theory, on this, it's true that Austrians are not fanatic econometrics, but there is also a methodological issue on this, that nowadays we are asking to data to tell more than what data can actually say. So I have to say that in my experience, econometricians are not really always showing a good attitude with their heart. They pretend data to tell something or too much compared to what they can tell. Said this, the youngest generation of Austrians, and I have in mind, for example, Andrew Young, have done quantitative studies to show how recent crisis can fit into the explanations, or into the Austrian explanation. But again, I think that a theory, to be a good theory, doesn't need to be supported necessarily by statistical in a statistical approach. Okay, this doesn't mean that you can contradict the statistic, but statistics is a very dangerous weapon that you can say with it, with a number you can say everything and the opposite of everything. The latest one was about the Austrians telling to do nothing. If you allow me, actually, I have here the quotation only in Italian. I don't have. I will send you the one in English, but because it's here in the book. When there was a certain negative cycle at the beginning of the 70s, and Hayek won the Nobel in 1974, many journalists started to go to him. You can find even the interviews on YouTube, asking what to do for the crisis. And he wrote this. Sorry, it's in Italian. A questo riguardo mi trovo in una situazione spiacevole. Per 40 anni sono andato predicando che il momento giusto per prevenire l'arrivo della depressione è il boom. Durante il boom nessuno mi è stato a sentire. Ora la gente si rivolge di nuovo a me e mi chiede in quale modo si possono evitare le conseguenze di una politica contro la quale avevo ripetutamente messo in guardia. Devo ora assistere alle promesse dei capi di governo di tutti i paesi industriali dell'Occidente che si impegnano con i propri concittadini a fermare l'inflazione e mantenere la piena occupazione. Ma io so che non lo possono fare. Ho persino paura che i tentativi del tipo di quello che il presidente Ford ha appena annunciato di posporre l'inevitabile crisi per mezzo di una nuova spinta inflazionistica possano avere un temporaneo successo e rendano ancora peggiore il collasso finale. No, it's not saying what to do. He's saying
I told at the beginning not to start, to kill the boom.
No, not to kill the boom, but no, he's saying we as Austrian, we say that there is a way to have a sustainable boom, and there are certain policies that inevitably will bring to a very bad crisis. So you did what we told you not to do, and now you ask us what to do. It's too late. So it's true that if you want is a way to go back, but it's also true that, well, like when you say to your kids, don't throw yourself down on the window. And then the kid jump out of the window and break a leg. Now,
you take the kids to the hospital. You don't leave the kids to die, right? So if you told them not to do something and they did it, you still have to provide. Yeah,
you still have to provide. You try to adjust a little bit the situation, but there might be permanent disaster on that if the height from where they jumped was too high, or even they could die if they jumped from too high. So it depends on the extension of their damage, the possibility later on to adjust the situation. Most probably, what happened in 2007, the period before the 2007 was so much credit inflation, so much pushing on the housing bubble, that then the disaster couldn't be but heavy. And once you hurt yourself, you have to wait that in a way the damage gets repaired. There is no other way.
May I say something? Just the endogenous causes of the crisis. You said that there may be an endogenous cause of the crisis.
Yes.
When the natural rate of interest, for business reasons, for the trade reasons, increases higher than the actual rate of increase. So that can be read actually paradoxically as a proactive kind of policy implication. Like if now the government
would raise,
has to raise, so the government has to intervene when the rate of national interest is higher than the rate that the government. So it does justify a certain intervention of the government sometimes, but never happened. I mean, you don't see that in the media or in their own tribunes, the Austrians, who imply governments to.
Yeah.
I wanted to just add another thing. There are several approaches to capitalism, but I think one of the most appealing kind of approaches to capitalism, which also is quite the approach that the world of finance has, is the pro-change, pro-dynamism, pro-investment kind of approach. Like you see in the world of finance that what's attractive about capitalism is the change, it's the boom, it's the changing business environment, new products coming to market, new markets opening up. That is what I think is also a discourse about the nature of capitalism. The nature of capitalism is very dynamic, and exactly for that can create disasters. At the same time, you can, historically, we didn't have the kind of capitalism that didn't have crisis. You know, every type of capitalism you can name has its own crisis, big crisis. But that's also the interesting thing about capitalism, because if it didn't go on, you couldn't see the possibilities, potentials, at the same time, the shortcomings and pathologies of the capitalist way mode of production.
Okay, the first one, we don't have to misinterpret Hayek. The fact that he says that the natural rate of interest can go naturally above the monetary rate doesn't mean that Hayek is suggesting that the central bank should raise it.
No, but
according
natural policy.
Let me explain. The natural consequence of what Hayek is saying is that we should shut down the central banks, or at least take out from their hands the fixing of the interest rate. And this is easy to explain. We know that if there is an increased demand for loanable funds, the natural interest rate will increase. But we don't know to which level, because that one can be set only in the market. Only from the market can emerge a price as a number. We talk a lot about this in the latest seminar with Professor Lucarelli. Eventually you can ask him the slides or the recording, because we have the recording. So it is explained why the attempt of any price fixed by the authority is logically unconceivable. I hope that I was persuasive last time.
So nobody can actually fix the natural rate?
No, only the market.
Only the market.
It's a spontaneous order. The last part, actually, I agree with you, and we are not the first ones telling that there is no capitalistic development without business cycles. Marx was the first one to tell this. Then we had Schumpeter, we had Spitov, we had Marco Fanno, an Italian economist, and I belong to this stream, which is a little bit far from Hayek and Mises. I developed my own approach, and on Tuesday at 10:30 in the morning, in the class of Stefano Lucarelli, I will explain why, according to my personal view, but still starting from this perspective, business cycles are at a certain extent unavoidable, and at which extent are unavoidable, and at which extent instead we can limit damage. So if you are interested in knowing my perspective on this, come on Tuesday morning 10:30. Instead, for a general introduction on the Austrian school, Tuesday afternoon 2:30.
Yeah. There are some questions from the students.
What is the difference in the artificial creation of high-powered money by the decision of the central bank in the interest rate, or by the emission in deficit by the state, if there is a difference?
Is very similar. Also on this, you can ask the slides of one lecture that I did last week.
My course is economic policy.
Economic policy, politica economica. I have all the. I analyze different cases and see also graphically how all this kind of policy fit into this model. Or alternatively, you can buy this book, which is available in Italian and in English, and find all these cases with all the graphs in the book.
Yes. If there are no other questions,
another question. If there isn't the need of intervention of a central bank and the state, and who create the new high-powered money that need with the growth in the growth economy?
First, the saving. The first available funds for investment are the saving, and then the profit themselves. The optimum idea for a corporate, for a company, is to have enough profit to allow them to innovate and go ahead with technological development. This is a key. I know a company in Denmark producing ventilation systems, which is investing 10% of the profit in R&D.
okay, I say something. There is a problem that we have to leave at 4:25, so it is likely that your answer will be private.
Okay.
Otherwise, I cannot say this. I want to anticipate that on this, as on everything else in economics, there is wide variety of ideas, so discussion is never ending, so don't be surprised of difference of opinions. I am very much sympathetic to the criticism, even though very compressed by Toporowski, but I don't want to go into that. I want to put some of the things he said in a wider perspective. That is, he named Excel, but he never spoke of Excel. From Excel, we have at least 3 lines, actually many other. Nothing to do with that, but I remember him. One is the line Mrs. Hayek, another one is Schumpeter, another one is Keynes' treatise on money, which I taught yesterday. They are different, though they have some relationship. You have realized that nowadays the Austrian economists are not Austrians. So it is a theoretical label. It's not a national label. The Austrian economists are mostly US economists. No one, it is the story. But Schumpeter, in the past, who was an Austrian economist, is not an Austrian economist. If you mean for Austrian economists, Mrs. Schumpeter. Why it is important to start from Excel? In this book, Interest and Prices, you have actually many models of a monetary economy. I am one of those who interpret Excel's interest prices basic model as the model in which we have a pure credit economy. In this pure credit economy, you have a monetary rate of interest, which is fixed conventionally by banks, and already a natural rate of interest. The definition was already in Excel. Actually, there were 3 definitions, and there is a long debate on what is the natural rate of interest. If you follow this line of interpretation, what the Excel said was the banks fix the bank interest rate, the monetary interest rate. But the natural rate, which is an index of the real return on production, is very variable. So we may have a gap between the two. And this starts the cycle. This is a cycle in which money is essential, but it is not a monetary theory of the cycle. Then comes Mises. Mises has a monetary theory of the cycle. This is the year. This is the year in the first edition. This, I think, is the year in the second edition. In the first, it is interesting because, contrary to a widespread legend, also in neoclassical economics, Mises interprets Wicksell the same way that I do. That is, your monetary system is a pure credit economy. And you are right to think so, even if in reality it is not so, it's more complicated. You have cash, you have gold, you have whatever. It is paradoxical because Mises criticized Wicksell for not being coherent when it seems to say, as he actually said, but in a mixed monetary system, which is bank money but also gold, that the banking system, or banks if you wish, have a ceiling in their lending to the economy. So what Wicksell is saying is that in the economy, the basic economy, which is imagining, there may be a gap. If the natural rate is above the monetary rate, there will be a tendency to inflation, which is financed with new money, and this escalating inflation, it is a dynamically unstable process. This cumulative process may go on forever. Well, Mises, contrary to widespread interpretations, even from circuitist, monetary circuitist authors, did not contest this. He said, you are absolutely right. In your system, there is no monetary readjustment mechanism. But there must be a readjustment mechanism. If it is not on the money side, I go quick, it is on the real side. And on the real side, the point is that we don't have a one good model, but we have a model with many goods. To be quick for reasoning, I have the price of the goods consumed today and the price of the goods consumed tomorrow and the relative price. So what he is saying is that actually when the banks put down, because of the political pressure, the rate of monetary interest, there is a change in the relative prices, so that there is a push to investment. I avoid to say over investment, which is a disproportionality crisis in Marxian terms. At a certain point, this must stop, but it may not stop. And Mises is actually clear about that. Banks can go on and on and on. If they do this, there is a adjustment mechanism, but it is the collapse of the monetary system. This was contested by Neisser, because to this, Mises said, oh well, in different years there are different stresses. He said, either go to the gold standard as an institutional thing, but maybe, you put something institutionally there, then politics changes it, or go to free banking, because no bank would overextend the loans and with the other losing the clientele. Neisser said, no reason for that. All the banks goes on together, they expand, the expansionary mode is generalized, so you have Pixelian overinflation. You don't want Pixelian overinflation, you need a central bank. And you need a central bank who put also the rate of interest. So this creates an interesting situation. Is really the idea of free banking or gold standard saving you from overinflation. The sketch, the real side of the model of Mises is very sketchy. This is where Hayek comes into. In my view, Hayek knows very well what Mises said. He, however, decided to make a reasoning not in the pure credit system, but in a mixed system. What I'm saying, he agreed with Mises and accepted that in the pure system it was in that way. But in the real mixed system, banks have a ceiling. Because if there is convertibility of bank money, internal or external, the public asks gold for the banknotes, or there is a loss of gold to other countries, there is a need to defend the reserves, and so banks are forced to raise up the. But actually, his real contribution was to very much develop the relative prices misalignments, and then malinvestments, and all that. Basing himself, I don't know, I am not an expert of Hayek as you, if he changed his mind, when he wrote these kind of things, he very much based himself not only on Mises, but also on Ben Bawerk and the notion of period production. On Mises, it's purely subjective. Everything is driven by individuals' expectation. In Bawerk, there is a strong objective element, technological element, and the same notion of average period of production, on which the idea of different lengths of production process seems to be very dubious. I don't want to go into that. If I'm right, and this is a thing that I learned from you, when Hayek put in an endogenous view of the cycle based on expectations which raise the natural interest, well, is in a sense in the tradition of Ixelles, and I will say in Schumpeter. I don't know if I would call that endogenous, because I don't know what moves these expectations. I know why Schumpeter said that his model was not a monetary theory of the cycle, and it was endogenous, because you begin in the situation in which the banking money rate of interest is zero. There are the innovators, they expect profits, but actually they do the innovations because they want to be part of the bourgeoisie. In the process, they get profits, so it is very similar to Ixelles, simply that the timing is different. It is not that there is first the gap and then all follows. No, you construct the gap with the innovation. The innovator needs the banking because they redistribute the resources, and so what I want to stress on this is that Hayek, though an Austrian and a conservative, and for the free market up to a point, was not an Austrian. Because in the entry on capitalism that he wrote for the encyclopedia, he gave three definitions. An economy based on the market, an economy in which there is the private ownership of the goods and the means of production.
You're talking about Schumpeter.
Schumpeter.
Yeah, you told Hayek.
Sorry, Schumpeter. But I
Yes.
made with the finger. No? Schumpeter was saying, yes, as Hayek was saying, he didn't wrote this. Free market, private property, of the means of production, and bank credit. Why bank credit is there? Because it breaks the limits that the market and the private property gives to innovation and the dynamics. If there is not the banking system which gives new money to somebody, this somebody could not buy means of production and workers with higher biddings, with higher prices, stealing from the others. And it is this that raises the rate of profit relatively to the rate of interest. So what Schumpeter is saying very clearly is that because you break the market, you break the ownership, at least temporarily, through this social accounting mechanism, which is the banking system, that you have what is good for capitalism, for him. A dynamic society, a dynamic economy, an evolving economy. You would not have a dynamic economy, an evolving economy, if banks not overextend, if they do not engage in speculative positions, if they don't do what is said to be awful for Mrs. Hayek. In the world of Mrs. Hayek, you would be staying safely, let me make a joke, conservatively, in a stationary economy. That is the idea. This is the same idea of Marx, this is the same idea of Minsky. The problem is that for Marx and Minsky, if you are in an economy like this, which has to go into speculative position, you are in a world in which there is risk, there is uncertainty, you will develop. It is something which happens. Then you may decide to think, like Schumpeter, that when things goes wrong, you have to liquidate, or you may think that it is better to do some things to steer up the mechanism. I don't want to go too much into this, but I use this just to say that from the point of view of Keynes is important here for two things. First, because the misalignment, consumption, investment goods, does not need to be based on an increase in credit. Austrian says so. Keynes, no. It is just that all entrepreneurs may decide to change the distribution of the given amount of the money supply between the two sectors. This is the first thing. Normally there is a credit expansion, but it is not absolutely necessary. The second thing is more delicate and would open a lot of. Here you are, even in Marx, or most Marx, in a world in which you have disproportionality prices, the prices of future goods goes up, the prices of present goods goes down. In the world of Keynes 30, as in the world of Minsky, there is a dual theory of prices. The price of investment goods is not like the negative, photographical negative of the price of consumption goods. It is ruled by completely different mechanisms. So you may have the two, in a sense, falling together. It is the price of investment goods, which are driven by widely changing expectations, which may go down, and then also the price of consumption goods go down in the cycle. Rafa was here because Rafa in 1932 said to Hayek, well, yes, there may be forced savings. So what? More capital has been accumulated. The preferences of the households has been disrespected. Capital accumulation goes on and on. The same Schumpeter said that in capitalism, the households choose in front of a set of goods which has been defined by the choices of firms and banks, producers' sovereignty. You don't go from traveling with a cart to trains through consumer sovereignty. You go towards another thing. So this is just to say the complicated mix. These two things are here to say. Natural rate, it is not very easy to say that what is the natural rate and what is the natural rate. This is the most intriguing thing. Even in the quotation in Italian, the idea is that if the government and the central bank does nothing, the rate of interest is fixed naturally. We may call this a policy of neutral money. Now, I told you Mises is very boring for me, no? But I had to read it. I also read the most boring book of him, Human Action. Human Action is very interesting. Hayek had taken one way, he had taken another way. But as I read an 800 pages book of Mises, Human Action, in one phrase, it is, look, yes, there is a natural equilibrium, but you never know what it is in the monetary economy. You never get it. Hayek, for me, is unclear, because sometimes it's this, sometimes he's able to define it. So how I make sense of what these two Austrians say? Not that they really know that it is possible, leaving to the privates to get the natural rate of interest. It is a deeply, maybe justified suspect against the state and government. Whatever it is, it will be better than you overproud human beings who think you can orientate the economy. Sorry, because I think yes, if you want to discuss with them, I don't know, but I have to go. Sorry. Noi ci sei dopo?
Sì, adesso mi fermo con Stefano. Andiamo.
Noi abbiamo lezione fino alle 7, poi andiamo a cena insieme. Se sei libero.
No, alle 6 prendo il treno e torno da.
Ti saluto. Discutiamo la prossima settimana.
Ci vediamo martedì. Sì.
We see ourselves on Tuesday, right? With a seminar. There was not your seminar on.
Yes. I'm finishing reading the book, and I need to prepare it.
Only chapter 3, eh?
Yes, during the weekend. So.
Okay, you let me know.
Yes,
Otherwise, I'll say you something. Mi spiace, ma siamo veramente. Yes, one page to preach. Would be nice. Be inventive.
Mi manderebbe una copia del file? Non so quanto.
Salvalo quello che abbiamo.
Sì, qui c'è la mia email.